Everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Welcome to the show. And my guest is Jan Irvin. He is with Logos Media. Unspun is the name of his program. They seem to have a bunch of really interesting programs up on that website. Jan, you came to my attention because you sent me a very interesting manuscript where you have answered to and refuted many of the charges that have been made going back centuries with regard to the Talmud. And I've been seeing a lot of this stuff come up recently that claims that the Talmud says a lot of very, really nasty and wild things. And I was looking for something like your manuscript and your research to help me figure out what's really true and what isn't. So, talk a little bit about how you got into this, and then we can talk about the manuscript.
Well, sure. For years I had come across these quotes myself, and I had believed a lot of them for years. And I had also meant to sit down and verify them because, I do forensic type research, and, they had the citations there. So I figured, I assumed that they were correct. But about a year and 4 months ago, I started a series of shows on Islam with a guy named Lloyd DeYoung, and we did, about 20 shows in the series. And, every time we were talking about some of the negative stuff within Islam, people would scream in the chat, and they were mostly trolls and whatnot. But I'm getting some feedback or something there.
Okay.
But so every time we would talk about these quotes, people would say, well, what about the Talmud? And what about this? And what about that? So in January of last year, Lloyd and I sat down and we just picked a random handful to start verifying and looking in the Talmud to see if they were there. And right away we noticed, it was, like I said, it was a handful. It was like 6 or 7, maybe 8 of the quotes. And right away we noticed at least a third were incorrect. And so with that, we ended up, I ended up spending about a month and a half or 2 at the time, just going through every day, checking each of the quotes, lining them up in a document. And I wanted to see what it all looked like. And so by the time I got done, I realized about 75% of the quotes were fakes, and that I needed to dig in and do a lot deeper research on the, the other, maybe 15 that were still stragglers there. And so then by the end of it, and going through the sources, check, and sometimes it would require reading 10, 20, 30 pages of surrounding text within the Talmud. But when I did that, what happened was I narrowed it down to all but one were fakes taken out of context, et cetera. So let me give you a breakdown of what I discovered. And, what I did was took the 59 of the most popular, and there's still a number of others, but after a while, you start seeing the pattern of how they faked them and the quotes that they make. What they do is they'll take one sentence or maybe 2 sentences out of a 5, 10, 20, 30 page discussion. And then they'll say, well, that is what, the Talmud is really about. And it's called, within the Talmud, it's called pilpul, which means peppering or sharp analysis. So one guy throws up a statement, and then the other 5 or 10 guys break it down and destroy it. And so what they would do is they would take the first comment and then omit all of the other comments, destroying it. And then I would get comments like, oh, well, Jews use reverse abrogation, which, in Islam, something published further down the line, let's say if it's in the beginning of the Talmud, like, Jesus is good or Christians is good, if it's published, at the back or the Quran, excuse me, if it's published at the back of the Quran in Islam, those statements at the back mean it's abrogated. So what was at the beginning of the Quran is no longer valid because at the end of the Quran, it's abrogated or dismissed.
Mm-hmm.
So what we found, or what I found, is one quote that was claimed to be from the Talmud accurate out of 59. So that's 1.694% accuracy. and 98.306% inaccuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so 12 or 20.338% of the quotes were taken from other Jewish texts and falsely claimed to be from the Talmud, but were still taken out of context. And then 4 of those, or another 6.779%, were entirely fabricated. And out of the total 59, 25 point, let me see, out of the 59, another 15 or 25.423% of the quotes claimed to be from the Talmud were entirely fabricated.
Right.
So a total of 32.2% were entirely fabricated.
That's
And
incredible.
then out of the other, 2/3, only one of those was actually true. The rest were taken out of context, misquoted, drastically taken out of context of the entire discussion.
No, that's an incredible piece of research, and it's a very important subject because you're talking about refuting information that has been out there about the Talmud, 90% of which at least is misrepresented, that goes all the way back to really, the beginning of the end of the Dark Ages. And I want to just
Well,
briefly
well,
talk about what the
Johann,
Talmud is. The
well,
Talmud is a compilation of work that occurred in 2 parts. The first part is the Mishnah, and the Mishnah was codified under the auspices of Rabbi Judah the Prince in in Roman Palestine after the destruction and the defeat of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, when the Romans renamed Judea Palestine to mock the Jews. Palestine being the ancient name of the Jewish enemy, the Philistines,
the
and
Philistines,
they
right?
destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. Or they built a shrine in the temple to the god Zeus. But yet they gave the Jews permission to have a Sanhedrin, which was a council of 71 men who had reached a level of education and holiness in the community, and who also had jobs, by the way. They were working, they were they were blacksmiths or farmers during the day, and they would meet and they would discuss Jewish law, and they would talk about how to look at the Torah and interpret it in a way that it could be a functional document for continuing a Jewish way of life going into the future, because they were somewhat pessimistic about the possibility of the Jews ever regaining sovereignty in Judea at that point. And they did it. And Rabbi Judah, who's known as the Prince in Jewish history, Rabbi Yehuda Nazi, a very great man, he was also a personal friend of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and there's a great exchange of correspondence between them. And Marcus Aurelius is the philosopher emperor of Rome, and he was, it was a period of tolerance for the Jewish people in at that time. Anyway, he codified the Mishnah, which is a short book that lays out the basic laws of Judaism completely in accord with the Torah. It does not contradict the Torah. Jewish legend has it that
And
this was
just
the
to
oral law that was given by God at Sinai and passed down through the generations through council. And it's kind of they decided that they needed to write it down because of the dire situation of the Jewish people at that time. And that's what the first part of the Talmud is. The second part is called the Gemara, and the Gemara is 2 parts. It's the Palestinian Gemara and the Babylonian Gemara. The Palestinian Gemara is not the authoritative one. It's a shorter one. It's commentary. It's what you're talking about, pilpul. It's based on the Greek idea of Socratic dialogue, where you'd have people sitting around a table and each of them presenting alternative views, contradictory views, and they would argue it out. And you see that in the Socratic texts in Greece, and Greece had a big influence on that. And the Palestinian one is not the authoritative one, because Palestine at that time was under, very anti-Jewish. This was after Aurelius, when things started to go bad. You had Diocletian and really anti-Jewish emperors. The Babylonian one, on the other hand, is the definitive Gemara. That was developed in the great centers of learning in Babylon, like Tumbedatha and others. And that's the one that made its way to Europe. And the reason it made its way to Europe is because Charlemagne wanted to bring knowledge to his empire. He realized that the thing he lacked was the ability to understand mathematics and reason and reading and philosophy. He wanted his people to become a great culture. So he invited the Irish monks of Iona, the famous, those guys kept the books, and also he wanted Jews. So he sent emissaries to Babylonia, which at that time was controlled by the Persians, and or actually by the Muslims at that point. And he recruited rabbis, paid them, said, "Please come to France," and they did. And one of the most famous ones was named Colonimus, and they set up yeshivas in France, and they brought the Talmud with them. And that's how the Talmud was introduced to Europe. Now, the charge against the Talmud happened in the 14th century when a Jewish apostate by the name of Nicholas Donin went to the Pope at the time. I think it was Pope Julius, I'm not sure. And he said the Talmud besmirches the reputation of Jesus. The Talmud says that Jesus is in hell, burning in human waste and forever, and that you have to destroy the Talmud. And the Pope really didn't want to do it, so he put the job off to King Louis of France, known as Saint Louis, and he's a great man otherwise. But he became incensed at this information, and the result is that he burned something like 15 crates of Talmuds, all the Talmuds he could get his hands on, and it was really the first big book burning. The site where they were burned is in Paris, over near the Chateau de Ville on the Seine, and that was the beginning of the kind of the conspiracy theories about the Talmud, and that it says things against Jesus, which it really not likely does. There might, it's been misinterpreted. I mean, I've heard rabbis talk about this. The likelihood, first of all, the Babylonian Talmud wasn't even written in a Christian country. It was written in Babylonia, which was Parthian, and then Arab, Muslim. And the reference to Jesus or Jeshu, it's not likely that was Jesus. So that was the beginning of the whole.
Can you hear me?
The smirching of the Talmud. I mean, you
can
have
you hear me?
Catholic intellectuals, and even to
I
this
don't
day,
think
people
you
like
can
E.
hear
Michael
me.
Jones.
I don't think you
Okay,
can
we're
hear
having
me at
some
all.
sound problems here. Can you
Yeah,
hear me, Jan?
I hear you fine, but I'm
I
trying
can't
to
hear you.
interject here.
All right, we're having some sound issues.
Um,
Let's see. We're going to. I mean, I don't know what's. Yeah, we're having some
do you
sound
hear?
issues. I say that
Okay.
we start again. I mean, we're just things aren't functioning. Let me
All
stop
right. Well,
recording.
you don't hear me at all then.